In the early hours of this morning, the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East shifted from a state of controlled friction to one of high-velocity kinetic exchange. Reports of multiple Ghadr-class missile volleys allegedly incorporating cluster munitions suggest a significant tactical evolution in the ongoing confrontation between Tehran and Tel Aviv. But as social media fills with frantic reports of collapsing defenses and media blackouts, the seasoned observer must ask, what is the signal and what is the noise? For decades, the prevailing assumption in Western capitals was that Israel's multi-layered missile defense, from the Iron Dome to the Arrow 3, was an impenetrable shield. Yet the physics of saturation suggest otherwise. When dozens of ballistic projectiles are synchronized with regional rocket fire from the north, the math begins to favor the attacker. The question facing us today isn't just whether a specific building was hit or a sensor was applied. The real question is whether we are witnessing a fundamental redistribution of power in the region, a moment where the technical and psychological deterrents that have held for decades are finally being dismantled. Today, we analyze these developments not through the lens of a 24-hour news cycle, but through the cold analytical framework of veteran intelligence perspectives. We are looking at the mechanics of a crisis that could fundamentally alter the global energy market and the very map of the Levant. To understand the gravity of these strikes, one must look past the immediate headlines and into the deeper history of regional intelligence. Ray McGovern, who spent 27 years as a CIA analyst serving as the prepper of the president's daily brief, has long cautioned against the groupthink that often plague Western assessments of Middle Eastern capabilities. McGovern's framework often emphasizes the distinction between policy-driven intelligence and objective reality, while mainstream narratives often portray Iranian capabilities as bluster. McGovern has consistently pointed out that underestimating a motivated regional power, especially one that has spent decades preparing for asymmetrical warfare, is a recurring failure of the U.S. intelligence community. In this context, the Ghadr 110 is not just a missile. It is a political instrument. With a range of roughly 2,000 kilometers and a high-speed reentry vehicle, it is designed specifically to challenge the reaction times of the Aegis and Arrow systems. As we bridge from the news of the strikes to a deeper analysis, we must ask, is the reported media blackout in Israel a sign of tactical chaos, or is it a standard operational procedure being misinterpreted by a panicked public? To find the answer, we must look at the second front and the economic choke points currently under pressure. The reports of Ghadr missiles reaching central Israel suggest a calculated attempt to overwhelm the probability of intercept. McGovern's analysis of military history frequently returns to the concept of attrition, not just of soldiers, but of technology. No defense system is 100% effective, particularly when faced with cluster warheads that release multiple submunitions. If the current reports are accurate, the Iranian strategy appears to be one of saturation. By launching Ghadr in tandem with Hezbollah's short-range Katyusha and Birkin rockets, they force the Israeli defense grid to make split-second prioritization decisions. Which projectile do you intercept? The one headed for a military base or the one headed for a residential block? McGovern has often noted that in these scenarios, the shield eventually cracks, not because the technology is bad, but because the volume of incoming exceeds the system's processing capacity. The reported images of fires in Tel Aviv may not represent a total failure of the Arrow 3, but rather the mathematical reality of a saturated sky. While the missiles capture the headlines. The tactical situation on Israel's northern border is equally critical. Reports of Hezbollah's Radwan units engaging in sophisticated ambushes against armored units, specifically the Merkava tanks, suggest a high level of coordination. McGovern has historically been skeptical of the quick victory narratives often sold by defense departments. He has argued that Hezbollah represents a formidable, disciplined, and indigenous force that cannot be simply bombed into submission. If Hezbollah is indeed successfully opening a second front, while Tel Aviv is under ballistic threat, the Israeli Defense Forces IDF face a strategic overextension. Can the Israeli economy, which relies heavily on a mobilized reserve force, sustain a high-intensity conflict on two borders simultaneously while its commercial center is under fire? McGovern's view would likely suggest that the longer this persists, more the leverage shifts away from the established power and toward the insurgent actors. Perhaps the most significant development is the reported shutdown or interference in the Strait of Hormuz. For an intelligence analyst like McGovern, this is the nuclear option of economic warfare. Roughly 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas and oil passes through this narrow waterway. McGovern has often highlighted how U.S. foreign policy frequently ignores the unintended consequences of escalation. If the strait is closed, the resulting spike in global oil prices doesn't just hurt Israel, it destabilizes the entire Western economy. 20,000 stranded seafarers and a halt in tanker traffic create a ripple effect that hits every gas station in America and every factory in Europe. Is this a temporary maneuver, or are we seeing the Hormuz choke used as a definitive countermove to Western sanctions? The reality is that while missiles destroy buildings, the closure of the strait destroys budgets beyond the maps and missile trajectories. McGovern's body of work often circles back to the human cost of these geopolitical gains, whether it is the panicked civilians in Tel Aviv hospitals or the 20,000 seafarers caught in the crosshairs of a maritime blockade. The civilizational cost is immense. We must also consider the ecological impact of this level of kinetic warfare. The deployment of cluster munitions leaves a legacy of lethality that persists for decades, turning fertile land into minefields and poisoning local ecosystems. Furthermore, the potential for a massive oil spill in the Strait of Hormuz, should a tanker be caught in the crossfire, represents an ecological catastrophe that would take generations to remediate. McGovern's advocacy for peace is often rooted in this very realization that modern war is indiscriminate. It does not just kill combatants, it destroys the infrastructure of life itself. As the second front intensifies and the skies over the Middle East darken with smoke, the sustainable future we all hope for drifts further out of reach, replaced by the immediate, desperate needs of a population in crisis. As we process the news of the Ghadr strikes and the unfolding crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, we must look past the fog of war and the media blackouts. The analysis suggests we are at a tipping point where traditional military superiority is being challenged by new realities of saturation and economic leverage. Ray McGovern has often quoted the phrase, "The truth shall set you free," but he usually adds a caveat. But first, it will make you miserable. Looking at the current state of the Middle East is indeed a sobering exercise. Can the current defense architectures hold for another month under this level of pressure? Perhaps, but the deeper question is, even if this shield holds, what kind of world is left behind when the swords are this numerous and this destructive? We invite you to reflect on the information presented today. Are we seeing a temporary escalation or a permanent shift in the global order? If this analysis helped you see the current headlines through a more objective, intelligence-based lens, consider sharing it with someone who values a deeper perspective on our world. Thank you for watching.